Hello, movie barfs, and welcome back to the channel. I think it's more than fair to say that The Legend of Zorro was a disappointing sequel. The Mask of Zorro was an instant classic that still holds up to this day with well-written and fleshed out characters joined together in a conflict that you're invested in. I mean, it was so good that it served as major inspiration for the character of Puss in Boots in Shrek 2. Unfortunately, its sequel, The Legend of Zorro, is anything but that. It was boring, it was messy, and it only contributed to the stigma of the curse of the sequel. As with most movies that suck, its main issue lies with its story, with the way the plot was written and the choices that the writers made the characters take. Let's go ahead and take a look at where it faltered and why it was such a disappointment. The film begins several years after the ending of the first, with the new Zorro, Alejandro, taking up his mentor's name of De La Vega. There's some political unrest in the area with the upcoming vote for California to be included as part of the United States of America. A gang of outlaws aren't having the idea of California joining the US, and so they attempt to steal the box of votes. That by itself is pretty illogical, and the film even acknowledges it when one of the characters mentioned that they can just get the people to vote again. Zorro shows up and manages to stop them, but in the process he loses his mask and he gets seen by two dubious-looking gentlemen not part of the outlaw gang. Alejandro returns home to his pissed-off wife Elena, who's upset with him for going back on his word to hang up the mantle of Zorro once the California issue was settled. They then go through the whole stop risking your life now that you have a family thing. Alejandro refuses as he feels that the people still need Zorro, which Elena dismisses immediately, saying that he's the one who needs Zorro, not the people. The two of them agree to disagree, and Alejandro rides off into the night after being summoned by the bell signal. The next morning, Elena is approached by the same two dubious-looking men who saw Alejandro unmasked, and they manage to hold her at gunpoint to tell her that they need her help. But the scene just cuts there abruptly, leaving us clueless as to what happened. We then shift to Alejandro soaking in a hot tub with a bunch of other guys before he gets served with a letter of divorce from Elena. As if that wasn't puzzling by itself, the film just jumps forward by 3 months, almost as if to silence you before you can raise any questions as to what just happened and why. Well, after the 3 months, Alejandro is moping around, depressed with the state of his marriage. But we, as the audience, are still scratching our heads in disbelief. Clearly, the divorce has something to do with Elena's encounter with the two dubious men earlier, and it's definitely not because she wants to leave him, despite how the film may want you to believe that it was due to their argument over Alejandro being an absent dad earlier. But what makes her choice so silly is that she doesn't even give Alejandro any hint of what's going on. She just leaves him hanging for 3 months, and come on, couldn't she just send him a cryptic message or something just to reassure him? Clearly, not telling him was worse, as it only made him more curious and intrusive into her affairs and hindering her. In the first Zorro film, she's known to be tenacious and resourceful, and it's uncharacteristic of her to just keep hush or not try to find another solution instead of breaking up her family. I don't buy that for 3 months she wasn't able to sneak a message to Alejandro, and if she was able to, then that means she wasn't willing to. Either way, it reflects badly on her as a character, and it makes her very unlikable. And besides, surely Alejandro would have tried to do something to win her back in those 3 months. It then becomes a soap opera drama when we find that Elena is now engaged to some French count. And so far, this is the main conflict of the film and the source of tension. But the problem is, we know it's all fake. Her divorce is fake just as much as her relationship to the count is fake. And when it's fake, it doesn't feel interesting or something that we can be invested in. We are 35 minutes into the film and we still have no clear idea as to what the film is about and what the conflict is going to be. What are the goals and motives of the characters? What are their obstacles? What are the stakes? At this point, we're still drawing a blank, and as a result, you can't get emotionally invested into the story. And I must say that for an action comedy flick, all we've seen up till this point are political discussions and domestic squabbles, which make for a very boring first act. In the first movie, with the same amount of screen time up till this point, we already knew who the key players were and their goals and motivations. We understood what each of them wanted and why, and how their goals conflicted with each other. It was a simple revenge film with Count of Monte Cristo vibes, but it worked. Its plot was so much more riveting and engaging than what we got here. In this sequel, the closest thing we have to a goal so far is Alejandro trying to win his wife back. But that's such an artificial goal because you know the marriage conflict is all fake. There's this part where Elena slaps him and it's supposed to be an emotional moment, but it just falls flat. And it's a shame that the writers chose to put them through this fake divorce because a lot of the charm of the first film came from Alejandro's and Elena's chemistry. It was a tough start to expand their relationship with this divorce. It just sucks the air out of the movie and makes for a weak foundation for the rest of the story. Here, they're just bickering parents serving the mediocre storyline. Yeah, I found myself missing Anthony Hopkins here pretty quickly. After a bunch of side plots, it turns out that Elena was working for some government Secret Service agents who are using Alejandro's secret identity as Zorro hostage to get her to comply. They're on to the Count as he's part of a cult group that wants to destroy America, and Elena serves as their informant while she's close to him. Okay, cool, but the Count eventually catches on to Elena in the scene where he feeds her her own messenger pigeon, but that just represents another question mark moment. Because how did the Count catch on to Elena in the first place? There was no hint or build up to this at all so far. It just comes out of left field and is more confusing than its intended shock effect. Just like the case of Elena selfishly hiding the truth of the divorce, it's another case of poor or lazy writing that makes this film underwhelming. Alright, I know I keep comparing it to the first film, but even if you take this sequel as a standalone, it's still pretty weak. But come on, I don't buy into all that, don't compare it to the original thing. It's a sequel, and a sequel should take and expand the original story and add more depth to the existing characters while introducing new ones. In this sequel, Zorro is pretty much turned into a punching bag. He begins the film emasculated by his wife, and this continues on throughout the film, when he constantly gets belittled by his son, the Count, and even the Secret Service agents. Come on, that wasn't fun to watch. And here's an idea. Instead of having the Secret Service agents blackmail Elena with Zorro's identity, why not have them blackmail Alejandro directly instead to stop the Count's plan? He'd be a great asset, and it sure beats having him drunk for 3 months. And at the end, the conflict between him and Elena over hanging up the mantle is still unresolved. Yeah, his son knows his secret identity, but how does that make it okay for him to continue being Zorro? His son knowing that he's Zorro doesn't change the fact that every time he rides off into the sunset, he may not come back alive. It's inconsistent that now he has Elena's blessing when she was so against it at the start. As for Elena, she was pretty unlikable due to the stupid divorce plot covered earlier, but I guess she's somewhat redeemed later on in the film with a bigger involvement in the climax. But what's up with all that soft focus effect on her every time she's on screen? It just gives her this artificial glow that makes her look like a supernatural being. The Count is pretty much an impersonal villain for Zorro. If Zorro's to be angry with anyone, it should be with Elena or with the secret agents for making her divorce him in the first place, not the Count. And one of the worst things about the plot is how downright silly the Count's plan is. He's revealed to be this cliché, one-dimensional villain who wants to destroy the US for, reasons. He even has this evil lair with a snake covering a globe for world domination, which just screams James Bond villain instead. In fact, the whole film has more of a James Bond vibe with his espionage theme and Dr. Evil antagonist. An odd choice. Maybe the filmmakers forgot that Zorro was one of the inspirations for Batman. And I can't decide which is worse, the Count or his equally one-dimensional henchman. This over-the-top cowboy thug that doesn't appear to take a shower, always shows off his filthy teeth, has a cross-shaped scar, and is also a religious fanatic who does heinous acts in the name of doing the Lord's work. Seriously, every time he shows up on the screen, it just sucks any possible fun or enjoyment. Zorro's kid also has a pretty major part in this movie, but you get the feeling that he was put in to make the movie more family-friendly and appealing to kids. But I'm willing to bet that he was probably more of an annoying presence at times, especially when they try to make him Zorro Jr. The little rascal even beats up his teacher and humiliates him in front of the class. Not exactly desirable behavior you'd want your kid to see. And his dialogue was a bit too modern for the 1800s when he taunts the bad guys with the line, "You want a piece of me?" And speaking of historical inaccuracies, I'll spare you the history lesson, but suffice to say there are plenty. The action is more restrained this time around due to the new film rating system. Zorro is nerfed in this sequel. There's less stabbing action with the sword fights, and right from the start, after Zorro does his odd job hat throw, he pretty much becomes Jackie Chan with his acrobatics. I don't really mind this, but some parts require huge suspensions of disbelief, especially the part when Zorro's 10-year-old son manages to hold his own against a bunch of armed thugs. The climax with the train scene was pretty good though, and could probably give the Lone Ranger a run for its money, but it just doesn't make you as invested as the first movie did. And for an action comedy, some of its jokes really missed the mark. Most notably, Zorro's horse literally drinking whiskey and smoking a pipe. I mean, did anyone actually think this was funny? And then you also have a Looney Tunes-like moment when a hot poker is jabbed into a guy's behind and he lets out a cartoonish yelp. Overall, The Legend of Zorro was an unsatisfying sequel to say the least. When I ask myself if this was a story that needed to be told, it's hard to answer with a yes. It's a bland story with a flimsy setup from the beginning and fails to expand more depth to its characters before degenerating into a silly climax at the end. It goes on for about 20 minutes too long with pacing issues from draggy side plots that don't do much to capture your interest. I guess it's still acceptable on some levels for escapist entertainment, but given the choice, I'd very much rather rewatch the original than this. Despite its title being The Legend of Zorro, it sure didn't do much in terms of leaving a positive, lasting impression. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.